Jim, you are next. Saw him, where is he? Oh, here he is.
Okay, here I am. Can you see my screen all right now?
Yes, and we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to do something a little different here. I've been kind of working on this problem for about 20 years now, and it really came up when I left the industry back in 1999 and went to Georgia State, and then wound up teaching on loan to Georgia Tech. And that was the first time in my teaching part of my career that I was dealing with non-business students. So I had a couple options. One is I could make it easier for them to understand the material by scaling the material, or I could try some innovation in different teaching techniques. And I opted for the latter. And so what I'd like to do today is to share some of those lessons learned along the way in kind of embracing or adopting different ways of learning. So what I'm going to do here is I'm using a different tool. This is called XMind. You'll see later there's some free resources. So if you sit through this, I'll give you some access to some of these things. But XMind is a free package or commercial versions. And what it allows you to do is to do some kind of critical thinking, design thinking, and brainstorming. And so I found that sort of a way to engage students and get them kind of thinking more. So what I'm going to do here in real estate is I'm going to look at sort of an interdisciplinary approach. And some of our speakers before us are based in the built environment or outside of a business school. And that's sort of what real estate is. It cuts across boundaries. But then it creates sort of a problem because what happens is we have a brand issue where students aren't necessarily getting the same exposure. I'm also going to talk about delivery options, but I'm going to focus on something called blended. And my colleagues earlier today have done a great job of talking about flipping classrooms and integrating technologies, et cetera. So I'm going to sort of build on that. This module here is really the value add of what I'm going to contribute. And this comes from my Wisconsin training on the Jim Grasskamp and sort of looking at real estate as a space-time, money-time concept, where we both have to understand the built environment and design, et cetera. But on the other hand, we have to understand the financial capital dimensions that we were seeing when we were talking about the impact of COVID on the housing market, et cetera. But really, real estate is sort of a thinking person's game now too, because there's so many dynamics coming on that it's really important to have intellectual flexibility. And so what I wanted to do is to sort of give you an overview of how I've integrated that with the hopes of giving you some insights into what you might incorporate. I should have relabeled this. I guess this is really, instead of lessons learned, that sounds kind of static and past, it's really lessons being learned, and we sort of got that today. So what I'm doing is I'm going to click on this here and take us to another course. And this is really a course called the Real Estate Process. I took this at Wisconsin when I got into real estate over 50 years ago, and I've been teaching in the curriculums that I've worked on, both at the University of Washington and here at UMKC, where we're getting students. It's like the development course we just saw, where it's a one-year seminar. This course is a sort of survey course that's designed to get students thinking about real estate more holistically, so they're building tools as to what they're doing. And this is sort of this mind map that I put together. I give a project overview. We've talked about breakout rooms and team-based learning, et cetera. So one thing I found is important is sort of give the students, and I won't go into this, but there's a kind of a guidance. That's a module I've written, a couple of books I'm working on that never got published, but it sort of goes through the process. But this is really sort of the value add here. What I've done is I've, over the years, pulled together about 15 years of student projects. And what I do is I give them one of these projects for them to look at and critique. And basically what that allows them to do, or forces them to do then, is before they get into the project, they can see what's being expected of them and what other students have done in the project. So you see sort of the scope of what they're doing. They're going through with the demographics, they're looking at the market, neighborhoods. One thing I like to get them doing is thinking about alternatives. So instead of real estate development being Eureka. They come up with a solution. They're sort of looking at alternative scenarios. And so what they do in the first week is I give them that assignment, and they go through and they critique the work that they've seen. And that lets them understand sort of what's expected of them in the course. And this is a 16-week course that they're working on this material. We then go into sort of a market analysis. And what I'm doing in here is pulling together some materials. There's not a lot well written on feasibility and market analysis, so sometimes you wind up doing your own. There's a section here on market analysis theory, and then I have an applied section here that sort of walks through and kind of goes through different techniques and using GIS and market tools. And these are set up as tutorials for students to figure out how to do these basic concepts. So we pulled some materials together for them on that, and they go through this process. If you look at kind of the organizing this, what I've learned along the way is you'll see some submissions that are due from students. And this is a kind of a feature of this. It's a pro version of this package. I think it's like $59 or something like that. But we give them a Gantt chart. I've learned that you have to give them submissions of this report. It's a semester-long report. They go through the process of going through this type of analysis. They turn it in. I give them feedback. They go back and revisit this while they're working forward, turn it in, give them feedback, revisit, and move forward. So it becomes sort of an interactive learning process. This is another example here, and I'm just kind of giving you some examples of going through. There's a kind of getting students to kind of think through more inclusively. They go through and they calculate the building envelope given zoning and heights and parking requirements, and then the total cost of the building. The front door model gets them thinking about the rent they have to get in the market. The back door goes to the market and says, what can you afford to pay? And they try to balance those, and they feed them into a discounted cash flow model. So in this course, what we're not doing is they're not doing a lot of financial modeling. I'm giving them models, and I'm encouraging them in critical thinking and not worried about the numbers so much, but at the set of assumptions that they're plugging into the analysis. So again, some of the lessons learned in this, it's important, as my colleagues have noted, sort of multi-channel content. Some people are visual learners, some people are more mathematical, et cetera. So what I'm trying to do is to balance it so that they can look at things, and this is designed for interdisciplinary students. So my students are, some of them are architects, some of them are planners, some of them are business people, some are finance majors and accountants. And so we have that sort of intellectual pooling. The programs that I've been involved with are fully contained, and that means that students do not have any business background. And so what we have to do now, the challenge is I have to teach design to business students, and I have to teach business to design students. And it's actually easier to teach design or business to design students because they have a more creative way of thinking, whereas MBAs and others tend to think more linearly. Another lesson learned, it's important to think about mastery learning, and I'll show you that in another module here in a second. Team-based learning works really well. I found that actually breakout rooms on a team-based project where I can pop in and see what they're doing, they actually are more productive virtually than if they're sitting in a classroom, because when they're together in a room, they tend to socialize. When they're sitting in a room where they're working, I can pop in and see what they're doing. And I can also see who's contributing what to where. Critical path thinking and kind of peer-based learning. So what they do when they make their communications is I have them evaluate each other and critique them. And so they kind of set their own curve as they go. And so that's kind of an overview process course that gives them sort of this space-time thinking here. The money time here is another dimension that's important. Students sometimes think they understand investments in time value, but you have to sort of go back to sort of a basic fundamentals here. And so this module here is designed to walk through kind of talking about the 6 functions of a dollar, explaining how the future value, present value sort of works, how to do it in a computer, how to do it in a calculator, and then kind of give them a visual cue, and then sort of the mathematical setting it up. And so that is designed to give them a sort of a framework that they're working on. I've given them sort of this experiential quiz where I can set up a model here where they're going through and kind of going through the organization again. I give them the quiz. How much would you spend? Sort of very basic. You have to crawl before you can walk or run. But then they go through, I give them a little time to do this. And then these are hidden columns here. And then after I've given them half an hour or so to go through, I give them the answer key and kind of work through. And this is the equation in Excel. So they're then learning how to apply that technology to it. Another example here that I like that's worked pretty well. It's hard to get students to go through these. This is sort of an interactive problem set where they're going through and they're working through a set of problems where here's the question. I give them time to work. I give them without the answers, but then after they've given it, kind of after the experiential learning, then it goes through and here's the answer to that. And it kind of walks through and kind of gives them the answer so they can see again visually and analytically how that problem is solved. And so that works there. And then another thing that I found, and this is really what I picked up when I was teaching at Georgia Tech to facility managers who didn't understand any real estate, is give them a problem where they're going through with a word story and they plug in an answer. And this goes through, I guess there's 10 questions in this one here. And then what I do is I submit the quiz. I did answer a couple of them. And then what it does is it goes through and it gives them the answer that they gave and it gives them the correct answer. And now what they can do now is they can reverse engineer it, go to a module where there's a hint on what they could learn. But the next time they take it, there's a whole new set of input numbers that they're working through. And so what that allows them to do is to sort of engage in kind of thinking about problem solving. And what I do then is I give them the highest score so they can go through, they get a 50 or a 60 or a 70. What I found is that students in almost to a certain, if they're motivated, they wind up getting 100 on the quiz. Some of them take 5 or 6 times. Some of them can do it the first time or second time, but it sort of engages them and gets them learning in a more dynamic environment. This is sort of an example here of how you set up these equations. And basically what you do in Canvas, I've done this in WebCT back in 2000, in Moodle, in Blackboard, and in Canvas. The syntax for these questions is different, but basically what you do is you write your equation and then you give them this vector of inputs and you give them a range, a minimum and a maximum for each of the independent variables. And then it'll generate 100 different answer sets. And so I don't have to worry about cheating, et cetera, because they each get their own problem set that they're working on, and I can kind of see as they go through. So kind of the lessons learned on that side of it is that it's important, it's multi-channel. We have to onboard students. So we have MBAs who take our courses. They don't go through the sequence. So what I'm able to do with some of the multi-channel material, if they didn't have the introductory course, they can go back and they can learn that material, bring themselves up to speed at the semester to do a little bit more work. But it sort of creates kind of a learning environment. And so that's
2 more minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, so here's the good part then. Thank you. So this is the other part. And what I'm doing here, this is a thinking part here. And I'll just give you an example here. This is integrating Tableau for teaching, and this is available to you globally for free. I have a little tutorial how to use it. And then an assignment here. This is the tutorial that walks through how to set it up step by step. And then what they do is they go through, they create a Tableau dashboard in the course. And I don't know if you worked with Tableau or not, but what we're trying to do is to integrate more analytics into the program and curriculum. And this is where it becomes kind of difficult for us. So this is a dashboard that they would create. And then the other that I wanted to show you is another one. This is a package called Alteryx. And this is available for you free as well. This is if you're trying to introduce analytics, and I'll use my last time for this. But this goes through, it's a drag and drop. This is taking opportunity zones in the US across the country. These are low-income housing tax credit properties, and you're joining these together. You go through and you're running through the model. It takes about 10 seconds to run through. And basically what it does when it solves it, it allows the students to sort of see what's going on where. When you're in time mode, you only have 2 minutes, time goes slow, but this is actually working pretty fast when you think of all this is doing. But what this did is it took the 46,000 LIHTC properties, aligned them with opportunity zones, and now the students could go in and work on that. So the last thing I want to use here in my 1 minute left, or however much is left, is sort of getting students thinking of futures. And so this is a project that they do where what I do is students don't think very critically. They read one thing on the internet and that's the answer. So what I did is I set up sort of a Google link here. This is on COVID, the impact on real estate. And it goes through and it pulls off about 1,000 articles. I get them to go through and see what's going on. That's in Google. In our library here, it's not as contemporaneous because academics take longer to teach, if you will. But this goes through and does a custom query for them on COVID. And this pulls up 1,200 articles. They can pull the article, they can look at the article. And what they do is they incorporate that in their sort of design thinking and in their final project. They did those projects last night at 10 o'clock at night. So when I finished, my night was pretty short, but they did a great job of integrating what they were doing and sort of forward thinking about things. So try to get them thinking big with the process, building skill sets, and then getting to understand how to be more analytical and then to be how critical thinkers. And so sort of the goal here is sort of building the kind of a foundation for our students and our faculty members where, and I would call this kind of resilient learning. And that's what you've all practiced today, is kind of going through and figuring out how to make things more integrated for people so that they can work at their own speed, at their own place, but being more forward thinking. And I think this has come up, and I'll just end with this. We're facing global problems, and what we need to do is come up with global collaboration. And this is an example where it doesn't really matter where we are, our students are, but we can share these ideas. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I didn't see. Yeah.
Jim, the really interesting presentation on this blended learning. I had two questions. One was about how you were able to give each student their own problem set with the vectoring. Is that some framework that you had to build out? Is that something that's a permutation from the school's online platform? Like how were you able to do that?
You are muted, Jim.
I had a really good answer before while I was muted, but so this is some of the hidden cost of innovation, is that the Academy is not set up to reward you for innovation. They're set up for articles and research. And so really what it does is, as you know, it takes a lot of time. When I started doing this, there was no institutional support for this. There's a lot more now than there was before, but I basically built those out myself because I didn't have any support when I started doing it.
And then you also mentioned students evaluate each other. What does that framework look like? Are they graded for that evaluation? Do you send them back, the students, that evaluative copy? How does that information get disseminated and further used?
Well, what they do is they go through, and I have sort of a form that I put together where they they go through and they look at each other's team and they rank them on the score here, and they add bullets. And then what I do is I do the same thing. I take all their numbers, give them the average, what their peers said, give them all the comments. They make their presentation. They're working on the report through the semester, and they have another week to integrate comments into the reports.
Wow. Thank you.
Other questions? Well, if I may add a question here, have you? Well, I came across Jupyter notebooks recently, or computable notebooks, which allow you to integrate text and code and the result of code. Have you looked into this? This could be some interesting framework that would allow you to put these together into some text, into some product. So there are viewers for those. It could also be put into HTML, so it could be put on a web page.
Yes, Gunther. What I actually do if on my personal website is jrdelile.com. I've got a bunch of visualizations posted. But a point I did make in the interest of time is that when you get this reference, there's a link in there where you can get Tableau for teaching for free. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to Alteryx, which is a little different, Gunther. In Alteryx, it's drop and drag. You don't have to know R or Python. So what we're doing is we're lowering the bar for a real estate student to be able to integrate analytics into what they're doing without having to be coders. My colleagues in analytics who are pure coders, if you don't do R, you aren't analytics, but this allows them at a scalable level where they can start integrating big data analytics into their projects.
I was not thinking about the students doing the coding. I was more thinking about you integrating these different materials into one product. So
and being one product, sort of like a
computable notebook, text with code, with the results of the code, with random permutations, quizzes built in.
No, but that's another time is, kind of a time thing, but
of course, yeah.
I am working on sort of a couple different modules to support these, but
yeah.
No, I haven't integrated that part of it.
Okay. Let me see the chat. Well, people are very impressed, I see here, but I didn't see any questions.
May I ask a question?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
I can. This is really impressive.
Oh, here you are.
Yeah, it's really impressive, and and the question was also in the chat. How long did it take for you to do that? Probably a couple of years. That would be like one of the questions that I also would be interested. And the other question that others may ask is always, how could we? If you wanted, how could we share that in a way that your work is it's dispersed? And I mean, it would be probably for you, at least for me, it would be so much pleasure if I could not only do my work for the students I teach, but also for others, and we could somehow reinforce each other.
Well, and that's why we teach, right? So at this point in my career, I'm kind of interested in, I don't want to take this with me when I retire. I just like to get this out there. So I do have, and I'll figure out how to package the linkages, but there's an example for Tableau. So I've spent maybe a couple 100 hours learning Tableau, 400 hours learning Alteryx. So what it takes, there's a human capital investment to be able to gear up for these analytics and things like that. But I've got a video and an example where you can take open data and you could go through in an hour or two where you could actually build a Tableau spreadsheet. And the same thing with Alteryx where you can walk through. So I'll share those with you all if you're interested in that. And I encourage you with the links there, Alteryx is geared up to be able to respond if you want to get the package to try to work with it. But it's maybe you create an affinity group of academicians who are trying to work with these tools. And there are it's very complicated sometimes, but there's some very basic fundamentals that are useful to share with others.
Well, sorry if I may say something, the legal framework for that is Creative Commons licenses. So that allows you to share your work with others, but to be attributed for your work. And usually, I think you'll agree, Jim, we don't make money on stuff like that. if that is our goal, I think we're in the wrong profession.
Right. Well, that's why I retired from ministry to come back to teaching about 20 years ago.
Okay. With that, thank you very much.